Hello, my name is Julia Barino.
And I am Anna Burgos. And in this video, we will be informally debating on the topic of globalization and deciding whether its effects are ultimately good or bad.
The motion is that globalization is good. There will be two sides, the proposition and the opposition. The proposition of the debate will argue for the motion, while on the other hand, the opposition will argue against the motion. Anna will be leading the proposition while I will be on the opposition side.
But first, what is globalization? By Stegger's definition, globalization is the process of expansion and intensification of social relations and consciousness across world time and world space. It is a multidimensional phenomenon that applies to a set of social processes that appear to transform our present condition of weakening nationality into one globality.
In order to answer the question of whether globalization is good or bad, three dimensions or factors will be discussed, namely economic, cultural, and environmental globalization.
Let's start off with economic globalization. This aspect of globalization refers to the mobility of people, capital, technology, goods, and services internationally, the integration of countries in the global economy, and the interdependence of different countries and regions across the world.
In order to put these aspects of globalization into the Philippine perspective, we will be giving specific examples for each, and in terms of economic globalization, street food stalls will be shown as an example. Because of globalization and the introduction of market economies, it caused a lot of people in the middle class to be pushed into the lower class and eventually turn into the urban poor due to their inability to keep up with capitalism. In order to survive and adapt, street food was created during the recession, which happened mainly because of the free market and affected countries, especially in the global south. This is because scrap meat and organs were the most affordable or the only thing affordable for the lower classes.
Economic globalization supports the motion. This is evident in its impacts on the global market, competition, economies of scale, foreign direct investment or FDI, and technological innovation. In the global market, due to economic globalization, there is the privatization of industries owned by the state, which has enabled the emerging markets to be successful. Transactions across borders are rising because companies are increasing consumer demand, and there is also the formation of multinational corporations. In terms of competition, economic globalization allowed for the provision of high-quality products and services, and it also forced companies to raise their customer satisfaction levels and their standards. For the economies of scale, it reduces costs and prices, and it supports further economic growth. Foreign direct investment or FDI, because of economic globalization, increases at a much greater rate than the growth in world trade, and it boosts technology transfer, industrial restructuring, and the growth of global companies. And lastly, for technological innovation, increased competition from globalization helps stimulate new technology development.
For the opposition side, I will now list down the negative effects of economic globalization. First, there is fluctuation in prices because of increased market competition. There is job insecurity, meaning most global economy jobs are insecure and temporary. This is mostly felt in developed countries since they can outsource cheaper white-collar and manufacturing jobs. Economic globalization also enables large companies to realize economies of scale that reduce costs and prices. This can hurt many small businesses attempting to compete domestically. There is also interdependence between nations, which could cause regional or global instabilities if local economic fluctuations end up impacting a large number of countries relying on them. And there is also national sovereignty, which some see the rise of nation-states, multinational or global firms, and other international organizations as a threat to this, which could cause some leaders to become nationalistic or xenophobic.
Moving on to cultural globalization, this passage refers to the transmission of ideas, meanings, and values around the world in such a way as to extend and intensify social relations. It involves the formation of shared norms and knowledge with which people associate their individual and collective cultural identities.
This means that globalization brought and continues to bring many changes in terms of culture. including but not limited to language, clothing, the way we eat, and the way we communicate. It also introduced new products, religions, as well as values and traditions. While there are many examples of cultural globalization in the Philippines as a colonized country, we would like to highlight the use of the English language. While English may be the universal language, it is still one of the most used languages in the Philippines, making it considered one of the most tourist-friendly spots in Asia.
In support of the proposition, I will be stating positive impacts of cultural globalization. Circulation of cultures enables individuals to partake in extended and intensified social relations across national and regional borders. For example, cultures fused by the internet, pop culture media, and international travel. Cultural globalization has added to processes of commodity exchange and colonization, which have a longer history of carrying cultural meaning around the globe. It involves the formation of shared norms and knowledge with which people associate their individual and collective cultural identities. And it also brings increasing interconnectedness among different populations and cultures. Lastly, there is also the concept of cultural relativism. This is the idea that a person's beliefs, values, and practices should be understood based on that person's own culture, rather than be judged against the criteria of another. This often leads to tolerance or understanding and acceptance.
As for the negative effects of cultural globalization, first we have detraditionalization. This happens when people question their traditional beliefs about religion, marriage, and gender roles, and so on. People are now actively questioning aspects of their lives, meaning cultures are much less stable and less predictable than before globalization. More people are aware of the fact that there are alternative ways of doing things and that they can change traditions if they want to. There is also the idea of ethnocentrism, which is the idea that one's own culture is the main standard by which other cultures may be measured. This often leads to pride, vanity, belief in one's own group's superiority, and contempt of outsiders. Lastly, there is the phenomenon of cultural imperialism. This is the creation and maintenance of unequal relationships between civilizations and favoring the more civilized.
Lastly, we will be talking about environmental globalization. This side of globalization is mostly concerned with internationally coordinated practices and regulations regarding environmental protection, usually in the form of international treaties. These are usually supported by non-governmental organizations and governments of developed countries, but opposed by governments of developing countries.
When dealing with environmental globalization, it is important to note that it is in direct opposition of economic globalization. Because while economic globalization encourages trade, environmental globalization promotes pro-environment initiatives that are an impediment to trade. Another thing to remember is that environmental globalization is not the same as environmental impacts. These impacts include both positive and negative effects of globalization on the environment. This is why we will be listing down the positive and negative effects of environmental globalization for the purpose of this debate. When talking about environmental problems in the Philippines, there are many things to list down. But one problem we would like to highlight is what is known as the sachet economy. The Philippines is the third worst ocean plastic polluter in the world after China and Indonesia, according to a 2015 study in the journal Science. According to a study conducted by the environmental group Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Filipinos use up a total of 163 million sachets and 48 million plastic bags a day. Yearly, this is about 16 billion sachets and 17.5 billion plastic bags. This can cause further problems such as loss of animal and marine life and floods.
Now, in support of the proposition, I will be stating positive impacts of environmental globalization. Products from the developed world tend to be more energy efficient, and so overall emissions relative to GDP tend to be lower. Environmental globalization promotes the transfer of intermediate capital goods and technologies that have less negative impacts on the environment. It also promotes transfer of knowledge and information on safety and proper waste disposal. There is also better utilization of scarce economic and natural resources because of the efficient allocation of resources. And lastly, globalization has been at the forefront of creating public awareness. The success of this environmental public awareness has resulted in consumer preferences evolving. Producers are therefore able to build their customer base by producing eco-friendly products.
Next, we move on to the negative effects of globalization on the environment. Increased consumption leads to an increase in the production of goods, which in turn puts stress on the environment. These include industrial waste dumped in oceans, increased use of plastic causing widespread environmental pollution, and economic-laden production of eco-friendly products and haphazard creation of environmental-friendly laws, which can be detrimental to the environment. Also, because of the increase in the transportation of raw materials and food from one place to another, the amount of fuel consumed in transportation has led to an increase in the pollution levels in the environment. This has also led to several other environmental concerns such as noise pollution and landscape intrusion. Transportation has put a strain on the non-renewable sources of energy such as gasoline. Lastly, there is also the problem of urbanization. Vast lands have been encroached upon to pave way for new buildings and urban planning.
So now that we've laid out each side's arguments, we have reached the conclusion that globalization can't be described as ultimately good or bad. In the first place, good and bad are relative terms, and depending on your situation, values, and beliefs, you could love or hate globalization or not even care about it at all. In the end, no matter whether globalization is good or bad for us as people or for nature and the environment, it is a phenomenon that is inevitable and irreversible, according to one of Stegger's core claims of globalism. Nobody is in charge of globalization, and so we can only see what else it brings with time.